Hello and welcome to Young Blossom 25 Future Leaders Revealed. I'm Inga, and with me is Vyas, my co-host. No, he's not. We lost Vyas today. So Vyas had some technical issues. We're going to miss him today, but we're joined by Dr. Gouri Mohan, Assistant Professor of Human Resources Management at School of Management in Paris. Leadership coach as well, working with emerging leaders around the world. And your research focuses on how leadership actually emerges in diverse teams, how people collaborate across cultures, and what it takes to build inclusive organizations where different voices are actually heard. Before entering academia, you actually worked in HR, and that, of course, gives you front row seat to the realities of, leadership in large organizations, small organizations. And today you combine research with hands-on coaching to help new managers or experienced managers lead more self-aware, intentional, and with more impact. Very warm welcome, Gouri. What did I miss? Tell us more about yourself, fill in the gaps also from you, from your personal life, maybe.
Sure. Thank you very much, Inga. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, missing Vyos today. But thank you for the very, very beautiful introduction. So just to fill in the gaps, I am at IESEG School of Management. So that's IESEG. I've been a professor for 4 years now. And before this, I did my PhD in management, IESEG Business School. And and in terms of my personal life, I live in Paris and I have a 2-year-old and a 9-year-old Great Dane. So a full-time mom as well in that regard. So yeah.
Very, very lovely. So you're joining us from Paris. We did not have somebody from Paris. We had somebody from France, but not from Paris. So you're the first guest from Paris. So very, very warm welcome. Yeah, given your context and background, we met each other through Arun, who's been on the show, and you've been doing some work with him, and he recommended highly to talk to you. And given your background, obviously very, very exciting to dive into some of the things with that young generation. A few areas I would like to double click today is learning. How does learning happen for the younger generation? You're in front of them more than we are. Development.
Mm-hmm.
How do they like to be developed? What's changing versus 20 years ago versus now, and what's going to be more relevant in the future? How do you see evolution of workplaces in that context with the younger generation coming in? What potential implication you see in that generation with regards to choosing a professional path today versus how it used to be yesterday for that sake? And the first question I would like to ask you, and you're gonna love that because I was listening. Are you considering yourself a leader?
100%. Absolutely. I'm a leader.
And why is that? Talk to us a bit about that.
Well, I think I am someone who is not afraid to create a vision for myself, for my life. I am also very deliberate and mindful about how I am moving towards that vision, the goals I have created for myself, the goals that I see for my teams, which includes my family, the people that I work with. And I think also throughout my career, my life, I have understood the value of being able to influence others and how much our work is so not just about what we do, but it's also about what we do for others. And we touch so many people. So I don't have a team of, in the formal structure, what you'd see in an organization or the CEO or a team manager, but I think I'm very much a leader and I've always been a leader. Yeah, it's a very important part of my identity. And I think the reason why I am able to sit here and speak to you about these things is also because I have that identity and I'm very clear about what that means for me. I think that what that means for me is, am I having a positive impact on my life and on others' lives?
That's beautiful. So when we first met, you told me that every time a semester starts, you ask your students, do you consider yourself a leader? And you're going to tell that, I will let you tell the story. And my reflection was, here we are, we're having a podcast that is called Future Leaders Revealed. And I actually have never asked the question whether my guests consider themselves leaders. So in the last episode that is live now with Ole, he was the first one joined, and I opened it up and I said, "Do you consider yourself a leader?" And the answer was very similar to what your students are probably
Yeah.
telling you in the perception of leadership. So tell us a bit more. What is the answer you get, and what's the follow-up question you're asking?
Yeah. So I always start my semester when I teach my leadership development course. This is always the first question I ask my students, right? And I say, just raise your hands if you see yourself as a leader. And very few hands go up, almost like none, right? So then I ask follow up questions. I ask, like, okay, why do you not consider yourself as a leader? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is because I not have the position of a leader. I think it'll take me 20 years to become a leader and to have a team. And it's this big, giant thing which just requires a lot of experience and learning and all of that. And then I ask the students, how many of you want to be a leader? And a lot of times, so the hands are a few more, but still very, very not that many. Okay. So I would say probably maybe around 10% of the class would raise their hands. And then I ask more. So why? Why do you not want to be a leader? And it's very much a reflection of their first answer because there's so much baggage that is attached to this label, to this term, this role of being a leader that it scares a lot of my students. They feel that, well, it sounds like being a leader would require me to give a lot, but I'm not really sure what I'm getting back in return. So it feels like I would have to take the risk on my shoulders, and I'm not really sure what the reward is going to be. I would rather have my peers to be equal than me. I don't want to be on, above everybody else and telling people what to do. I don't identify with that. And I think that's something which is very, very resonant with Gen Z, is that they don't want to be in this position of a hierarchical leader telling others what to do. That's just not appealing to them. That sort of seduction of power and status is not the same thing that perhaps a few generations ago existed. So that's usually the answers I get. And I love starting with that because even at the end of the first session, a lot of these opinions have shifted, and it gives me a direction for my teaching because that kind of becomes the focal point around which we discuss a lot of concepts around leadership.
That's interesting. And do you see also, aside from them being not very attracted to the idea of leading potentially a big team, having the, I guess, responsibility to tell people what to do, is that the responsibility that is kind of daunting, or is that I I just prefer not to be accountable and responsible for whatever. What if I say something wrong and then all goes down the drain? Is that also in there?
Yeah, I think it's both because there is a lot of risks that's associated with being a leader in the way we perceive it, right? Because I think a lot of times my students, but I think also more generally, people tend to think of leadership as this heavy burden sometimes that you have to carry. And you are visible. You're very, very visible as a leader, which means that the buck stops with you, right? So if something goes wrong, then you are responsible, which means that you're also probably the first one to be let go, to fall when things might not go right. So there's a huge part of that fear that plays into minds. And I think we have this recent movement of conscious unbossing, where a lot of young employees do not want to move into middle management roles or move beyond middle management roles because they don't feel that the risk is worth the reward. So I definitely think that there's one part of it where there's a larger proportion of risks and fear associated with being a leader. And sometimes maybe there's also a belief that perhaps I'm just going to be the scapegoat. Maybe I'm just going to be projected forward as a person who's, taking this. But there might be things which are outside of my control that I don't really influence. So do I really have true influence on my outcomes, or is it just a positional title.
And is it probably many would say, well, here we go again. They don't like risk. They like to play safe. They are just vocal, but beyond that, why? What would make it more attractive for them to consider
So I
or to
think,
aspire? Consider
yeah,
is probably to aspire.
yeah. I'm a firm believer that a lot of models of leadership that we have been taught and which are very much endorsed in the pop psychology literature, it's not so for one, it's very removed from reality. And two, they're not aspirational anymore. And I don't think they really resonate with the Gen Z employees. The first reason is that we used to create this aura around leaders, right? That you have to be a leader. Like, how do you become, leadership development programs, leadership skills training, leadership consulting. There's so much of hoopla around how do you be a leader, how to become an effective leader. And this aspiration was based on the fact that this is going to bring you greater status, greater power, greater wealth, and a lot of associated perks of that, right? So you want to rise up to the top. What a lot of I think the programs and the coaching, did not talk about it was about this sort of on paper model. This is what a leader is. And in reality, it does not work like that, right? We all bring our own flavor into how we work with people, how we relate to people, how we influence people. And leadership is nothing but relating to others, right? It's about influencing others. So this sort of cookie cutter approach about saying that this is who you should be is not a very aspirational thing. And second of all, that cookie cutter was based on these dominant, alpha male, super domineering, loud prototypes of leadership. And again, that is something which, when you talk to a Gen Z employees or my students who come into the classroom, they're not really motivated by that. They don't really relate to that anymore, which is interesting to me because, which is also for someone like me who studies this, it's actually it's a good news because that means that there's more diversity that we can bring into leadership prototypes, right? And how we talk about who should a leader be. There's more variety in that conversation. There should be more variety because we're all different. So I think that sort of pop psychology sort of approach of telling people that be like this, act like this, behave in this way, is all I think it is often suffocating for young people. And if you remove that, and if you ask, as I do in my coaching, when I ask managers what would bring greater alignment between who you are and you as a leader, that is where there's a real spark, right? And you're sort of trying to see, okay, I can tailor this role to myself, and who I am has value to my role as a leader. So if I bring in my authenticity, that's actually a good thing. I don't have to hide myself. So I think, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I do think there needs to be more diversity in how we talk about leadership.
I think it's how we talk about it because of how it evolved in the past, let's say 20 years is really, I mean, if you ask, sometimes I do prompts, AI prompts for images, and if you prompt a leader,
Yeah.
it's exactly the image that you portrayed. It's going to be that white, assertive male in a very fancy office with bright windows and great view over. It always looks like New York, and I think that is not indeed not very very aspirational, because what comes with that, the responsibility that comes with that, does not seem to justify the costs that also come along. Aside from the fact that they also question whether this is the right approach in the first place. Like, do I want to be that, assertive person who is imposing power and whatever else? And I know it's more nuanced to all the listeners. It's more nuanced, and I know that, but the image, I guess, that they're working with is quite bad, and that's why it's a lot less attractive. And I think all of us were moving a little bit more, not only the young generation, a little bit more into a more nuanced picture. But the role models today, and I want to talk a little bit about role models because we how do we formulate whether we want to be something or not?
Yeah.
Very often role models are very helpful in aspiring to something. So I don't know, I'm a runner and there are other female runners who have achieved something and they were older or similar age. So I'm not aspiring to do a marathon in 2 hours, but for my level, I kind of look up to somebody who has achieved something in what way, with what sacrifices, yada, yada, yada. Do we have a role model problem at the moment?
We do have a huge role model problem currently in leadership. And this is, for me, it's a personal crisis every time I go into the classroom and I'm talking about leaders. And I think that what we see around us are definitely, I mean, so there's a mismatch between who has power and who's a good leader, right? And traditionally, we have considered these are the same things. So who's at the top? That's the leader, because that person also has the highest power. And then how should they act? And we got away with sort of lecturing about, oh, this is how good leaders are made, this is how good leaders behave. And then we see right now this sort of the reality play out where there's a very vast gap in how people with power are definitely not acting as good leaders, right? So it becomes very hard to talk to students about, say, hey, look at that. Look at this is an example of great leadership. So what I do in my class is I give examples which are very, very radically different, right? And I try to show them, one, that leadership can come from anywhere. It is not attached to a role or a position. And it does not have anything to do with the amount of power you have. You can have influence even if you don't have formal power. And one of the examples I use in this, I have to sort of tip my hat to the designers of the course that I teach. We use this case study on the 2008 terrorist attacks in Mumbai, and which happened in the Taj Hotel. And there's one example particularly from that stands out to students. It's this. So it's a Taj Mahal hotel in Mumbai. There's a huge banquet going on of Unilever employees who are all in the banquet hall. And suddenly there's a terrorist attack outside. There are terrorists roaming around with guns. Everybody's petrified, right? And I show the example of a 22-year-old banquet manager, a woman who takes charge, who decides, she stands up, directs the guests who are senior leadership of Unilever's what to do in that situation. She's single-handedly leading that room through that crisis, make sure everybody gets out safe, right? And that to me is a great example of leadership. And to me, that conveys to the students that leadership exists everywhere. It's not that you have to look at these big names to understand who is a leader. What should I be like if I'm a leader? It exists everywhere. It exists in your group, in your classes. It exists in you as well. Think about your own experience and where you have displayed acts like this, behaviors like this. What made you? What was going on inside of you when you decided to speak up or stand up and do something or lead your team through a crisis, right? So these are examples. And that's really important because somewhere I think today we have to look elsewhere to see role models of leadership because unfortunately, we're going through a leadership crisis where we do not have enough role models, at least the ones that we hear a lot about. There are a few, and I mean, when I talk about leadership emergence, I also talk about politics and positive examples of how people who are from minority groups emerge as leaders in very, very adverse situations. So there are examples of that, but we have to go beyond that. And for me, one big part of this is disabusing the notion that leadership is attached to power. And only if I have power can I be a leader. And only if I have the title, I can be a leader. So, yeah. So, yes, we do have a crisis and we have to look beyond what are popular examples to find those role models of leadership.
Yeah, I think it's formal versus informal leadership. So there is a nuance, and obviously in the corporate world, it's very much defined as of which level of seniority you're going to be spoken about as a leader, which is also funny in a way. And until then, you're a manager. And there is a difference whether you're a manager or a leader. So there is formal and informal whether you formally are assigned and asked to lead something or informally, I guess we all can take charge in our lives to lead something without recognizing it as a piece of leadership work. I guess on a more, and what people tend to think about when they're being asked, are you consider yourself a leader, is in a corporate context. In okay, I'm in the company, I'm leading a team, and I have a formal status
Yeah.
by whatever definition is being used. And the effectiveness of that leadership is also being measured against very specific criteria. And I was just going through an assessment center with a very big FMCG company. Let's put it this way. When I was receiving feedback, I was reflecting a lot again that there are boxes that you're being put into, whether you are effective or not, based on the principles we defined and we deem as effective. Example, if you are helping too much and you are not, and you're empowering too little,
Yeah.
that is not effective. You're supposed to empower a lot more and to help a lot less. You need to help people to help themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I thought, yeah, can I relate to it? I can. For me personally, I can. I guess I have a little bit of a helping syndrome, but does that make me ineffective as a leader? Only if I really lead a large organization, and if I have the helping syndrome, I'm probably gonna suffocate and drown and die. If everybody is coming for help for me and I have the need to help everybody without training them to help themselves. I guess, okay, in that instance, I could say that's not effective, but the competence as such to deem that ineffective, I think is a bit that's a different angle. So there are also metrics and formalities that have been implemented over the last years that are saying, are you an effective leader or are you not an effective leader? Which all of them are linked to you leading a big organization.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So do you think we need to dismantle that also in companies a bit more because what drives, and that's the link I wanted to make, what many companies struggle with is absence of accountability. So often people sit back and it's like, oh yeah, that's my boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not my department. That's somebody else. Not intentionally necessarily, but the behavior is there and the underlying, without saying it, people are saying it. And the lack of accountability is probably not so much driven that people don't want to take accountability, but it's driven by I'm going to use a big word, glorification of a leadership position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because this is so glorified, people are like, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
he will do it. So I'll sit and wait. Not my job. Do we need to remove that glorification and all this concentration and disperse it more into embracing that everybody leads something and by impacting and influencing something? And as a result, we will be able to increase accountability. Is that a theory that could hold?
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there. So we definitely know from you and I have worked in organizations, and anyone who's been in organizations would know that people who hold these positions of power are not always very good at influencing, right? And they're not very good at in being good leaders. We've worked with formal bosses who are terrible leaders, and vice versa. We've also seen very effective leaders who do not have positions or titles, right? Who in your team, you can see that. I see that in my classrooms every day, right? Now, the problem, I think, is that there's not a good recognition of this. A lot of times we promote people for being good at their jobs, for their task competence alone, without looking at their relational competence, right? And without asking that, well, has this person demonstrated leadership while not being a leader? And we don't ask is this person a great fit for a job as an individual contributor, which might still be promoted, but does not require leadership, right? And they are different. they're different. So we don't have a system of rewarding people for being really good individual contributors. We conflate the individual good individual contributors and good leaders, and we assume that once they land the job, they will just learn on the job how to be a good leader, which is a disastrous strategy to pursue, because that's bad for them who are getting promoted to those roles. It's bad for their teams. It's bad for the organization. It's bad all around. So what I do think is required is why we look at informal leadership is because we know that in organizations there's always informal leadership, right? And it's a lot easier to recognize that than recognizing formal leaders, which comes through a promotion, through people holding certain roles. But when you look inside team, you see structures, you see these networks of influence, and you see certain people are more influential than others as perceived by their peers, their teammates. These are the people who always maybe take lead in initiating actions. Maybe they're the ones who are empowering others or helping others, right? And these networks give us a lot of data about people's capabilities, like what makes them be seen as good leaders, what else is operating that shape these perceptions of who is a good leader or not. And that is so important to understand, because ultimately we also want to make sure that these are the people who get promoted to positions of leadership, not just get promoted, but be promoted to leadership positions of leadership because they're able to already influence in the environment they are in. And that is also, I think, for Gen Z, something important to understand. Whether you want it or not, you are being judged as a leader, right? People are looking at you and say, would I want to listen to this person? Does he have my best interests at heart? Do I think that she's actually good at what she's doing and she's capable? And if I trust her, she's lead us to a good outcome. So these dynamics are going on anyway, in whichever environment you're working on. What organizations should do is incorporate these perceptions, these dynamics into how they make decisions about promotions to positions of leadership. Because a lot of times, who gets promoted? The best performers. Which sales managers get promoted first? The ones who've shown the highest growth. Doesn't matter that the teams don't necessarily like them. A lot of times, in my experience, no, it doesn't really matter that much. So we look at performance as the biggest metric when putting people into positions of influence, which I think is not a great strategy.
I think it's a really good point that you're mentioning how we run assessments, leadership assessments, and the leadership assessments often have both components, the results. You got to be able to deliver results. You can't just be, a nice, compassionate, and very influential person. But if you're not able to deliver results, all of that, unfortunately, you probably need to work in a different environment then. But how the results are delivered is not being measured. And then technically we have 360 tools that we ask for feedback, but it's so instrumentalized that people know, this person is asking for 360, so it's probably going to be after promotion. So I like you. And you even select people for your 360 where people will give you good ratings. It's no longer a development tool. And at least some, HR executives are acknowledging that. Like, all the people understand how the system works, and it's so instrumentalized that it's very hard to use any of those tools for feedback because of how they're being compiled. Now, there is evidence on results. They're very measurable, but equally there is evidence on how those results have been delivered. And I only remember in my 25 years corporate life, I was working at Mattel, and Mattel had a rating system that was actually PepsiCo had it a couple of years ago, well, probably 15 years ago as well. There was a rating for business and a rating for people. And people meaning how you do things. Business means what you did. Now, the rating would then be merged. And you would get an average rating. So an average of 3 can still give you an extremely good business result, an extremely poor people result. So you would still average on 3, which is not a bad rating at all. But of course, you can double click on that. It went away. Like both companies I just mentioned, they just moved away from that metric. And I guess because people were not acting upon it, so we may as well get rid of it because obviously it's complexity. Because we value results more than how they're being achieved? Question mark. I guess. So when you remove that, you have nothing, at least on the short term, to go to. And to some extent, it was replaced, of course, with 360 feedback, how you are being perceived in the organization, other personality tests, other ways to get assessment by a third party. At the end of the day, and that's a little bit, talking from the inside out, you can be a great person, great influence. Your results may have been so and so. And again, results are not only linked to you, how you personally performed, it links to context, to circumstances, to like a lot of factors influence also your ability to deliver results. You can be the greatest person.
Yeah.
You have not delivered results. You will not progress. At the same time, you can be the biggest jerk. For as long as you deliver results, you will progress 100% for sure.
Yeah.
How do we break through that cycle?
So I think what we're talking about is not that results are not important,
Correct.
right? And results are important. For anyone, and especially for a leader, it starts with you. Are you on top of your things? Like, are you able to influence your own actions? Like, forget about others, right? Are you on top of your goals, your vision? Are you progressing? So that's task competence, right? That's the first step to that. But I think the problem is if you had two people with the same result and one was a complete jerk and the other was a more compassionate, relational person who was very collaborative. Now, we have a tendency to believe that the jerk is probably more ambitious, more stronger. They are more capable because they're so driven by the results and they would do anything to get there, right? And that is what I'm talking about. And we tend to see that, okay, maybe the collaborative, compassionate, empathetic person is somewhat weak and maybe would not fit into the mold of a leader because leaders should just go after results no matter what. And that is the problem. Because the same things which we know are not great for people management, for motivating, for inspiring, for being compassionate, all the things that we talk about, those things also are seen as somewhere in our minds, we positively associate that with being a good leader. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem. So let's keep results. And I'm not saying that that's not important. But for some reason, the way we are socialized and the way we have been thinking about leadership and the way we have written about leadership and studied leadership and practiced leadership is about being these competent jerks.
And I guess just to close that loop and coming back to Gen Z, because they're highlighting they would not do whatever it takes. Like whatever it takes is very different for them than probably it was for me 20 years ago.
Exactly.
And because they are so articulate about it, they are also being perceived by that same generation as weak, like a better way of word to put it. Do you agree with that?
Or less ambitious or not driven enough. Like we had Zuckerberg call for the need for more masculine workplaces, right? So it is that saying, okay, put flexible work hours away, put work-life integration away. And we have a lot of advocacy on these things happening now, which goes completely against what I think the Gen Z generation wants, believes in, and how they think about life. Very different from how we thought about. I mean, when I entered the workforce, it was very different. It was hyper-focused on goal, put everything else aside. And it didn't work. It didn't work. And so I think that Gen Z is much more mature in that regard. And it is getting pushed back in the corporate world.
Yeah, big times. And let me play that back at you. I had a conversation yesterday, somebody also from a university, and she's running a career center at the university. And she was mentioning, we need to be a bit mindful how cater or facilitate the conversation with Gen Z and give them too much babysitting, lack of better way to say it.
Mm.
And what she meant by that is we also need to play a bit the reality at them. We also need to let them discover life as it happens, while they're influencing it. And from her point of view, if there is one thing she would recommend them to think about, is to talk less about the how and focus a bit more on the what.
Okay.
It resonated really well with me because I think part of the friction that we're having is Gen Z emphasizes a lot on the how. Flexibility is important to me. This is how I do my work, right? Work-life balance is important to me. This is how I do how do I perform best? Not how I do my work, but how do I perform best? What else? A purpose is important to me. Okay. This is again, the hows are a lot more emphasized instead of the what's. And I think the what's are a lot more emphasized in my generation. And it's almost when somebody amplifies the hows, I start to amplify even more the what's. So we're like escalating almost,
Yeah.
instead of balancing on both sides a bit out. Does that make sense? Do you, because I haven't thought about it this way while thinking about why is there such a big tension, or the tension is much bigger than it used to be between generations, because there's always tension. And I think many of those things were also important to me. I was just a lot less vocal about it, not to say not vocal about
Yeah.
it at all.
Yeah.
While this generation is probably the first one that is so aggressive vocal about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very interesting. It's a very interesting point. See, to me, I have never really drawn that distinction about the how and the what, because work is about what I'm doing. Is it creating an impact? Does it relate to my what I want to do with my life? Or is that completely detached and has nothing to do with my sense of self? Right? Does it allow me to be who I want to be, which is a wholesome person, who has time to take care of my health, who has time to spend time with my family, who has time to pursue things that make me who I am. And I think also, does it offer me the financial independence that I desire and deserve? All of this is a composite of what my work is, right? And so I don't quite, I mean, the nature, the content of where you work, what sector you're working in might differ, right? What you're supposed to do, what field you're in. But ultimately, the question, all of that is the what of work. And I hadn't really thought about it as being different from the how, because work is a channel of self-expression. And that self-expression, I think, for when I was started working, and probably when you started working, was very narrow. Okay. Would my boss be happy with me? Will I get a big paycheck? That was it. Will I get promoted to this position? That was it. And I think that definition has become broader today. What they're looking for from that what is just a whole more, I would say, a lot more well rounded. So they're asking that same question about, what am I getting from this job? What am I offering this job? What am I moving forward when I'm working for you? What am I doing? We never asked that,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
don't really see that being very distinct, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I can relate to both, and to some extent. I think it's always a bit, who do you have in front of you, and how you gonna trigger
Yeah.
certain things, right? Because some people are triggered for some things, and I think it's this a bit nuanced and moderate approach that you can choose.
Yeah.
Most of Gen Z doesn't choose, which leads me into communication. Like, the communication is quite, it can be perceived as harsh, it can be perceived as blunt, it can be perceived as, in your face, like, that's on my mind, and I will let you know, and there will be no misunderstanding. You will understand what's on my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that can be moderated a little bit, for sure. Now they also have to learn it, right? I'm pretty sure 20 years ago, I was very different in my communication than I am today.
Yeah.
So, hey, reminder to all of us,
Yeah.
like, remember how you were when you were 23,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, very, very different to what I am today, for sure. I want to touch base a bit on development.
Mm-hmm.
What's your observation with regards to how this generation, the younger associates, are thinking about development? What does development mean for them?
That is a great question. Well, I think they are, when I think about this generation, I think there's a lot of confusion. There's also a lot of anxiety about, am I going to be relevant? And how can I develop myself in a way that I stay relevant, right? There's also a huge, I mean, they have this big platter of choices in front of them. And I think that often leads to overwhelm. There's definitely a lot of information overload that's coming at them. And I think that's perhaps also the reason why they are pivoting towards an idea of and self development that is more holistic. Because for us, perhaps the development meant, how do I get to this place, or how do I get to a position of VP in 10 years? What do I need to do? Because that represented certain level of success, which meant wealth, status, security, etc. They don't have a lot of that, right? They don't have the same level of security, wealth, and status that we were promised. So for them, development would probably mean, how do I make sure that I am not taken over by AI, for instance. Like, I have a job where I'm still doing something. There is a lot of, in my experience, my students respond a lot more to interventions that are experiential. So they love talking to people. They love, like, when I say, okay, go interview an expat and who has 10 years of experience, what have they done? What career changes have they gone through? That's something which immediately they're like, oh, that's great, because now I'm getting an idea of what it's like in the real world. I think also they are very much, I mean, the pace of their learning is so high, right? They're 2 steps ahead of of where we were. Like, I would say 5 steps ahead in terms of the kind of skills they're picking up, right? They know they need to do multiple things. So I think that's another idea of development. So it's a lot about multi-skilling. So even if this is the concentration, even if this is my focus, I'm an international business major. I also want to be learning about other things. I also want to be keeping my choices open so that I can pivot if I need to. If I need to, I can change my tracks. So I think it is a lot more less about specialization, more about generalization, and how to outrun or you know outcompete AI is, I think, a big conversation that's happening.
That's very nice how you put it. Anxiety about becoming irrelevant.
Yeah.
I think that's, I mean, even our generation starts to think, okay, we still have some 20 years of work ahead of us. So how do we, whatever we did the last 25 years, will that be relevant enough to sustain the same level that we have for the next 20? And I think the answer is very simple. No, it will not be enough. Only imagine what they're going through, and they're looking at things in a different way, through a different lens. I had a conversation with somebody who was just about to start a master, and she said, for me to qualify for a job interview today, I've done all these things, fantastic CV, as I say, and I used to hire people. And she said, well, it's not good enough anymore. What's missing? I said, and she's done internships in different countries, in different sectors. She did some side gigs of work, great grades, good school. And she said, well, last time in the interview, I was asked why I was actually not working full time next to my master's. I'm like, all right. It's like, yeah, because these days you actually can work full time and do a master's, because how learning is designed and how, some university programs are designed, you can do that.
Yeah.
And she said, and I have chosen not to. So I did some internships. If you do internships in the country where you study, it's not good enough, because then you don't have cultural relevance.
Yeah.
You do internships in all these multiple countries, you have done it all in the same sector. Not good enough. You need to have diverse sector experience. The things you have to add into, like, the toolbox seems to be unlimited.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
27 years ago, it's university. Maybe I have, some restaurant job that I do in the night, but that's about
Exactly.
it. Like internships maybe, but
Yeah.
most likely not even.
Yeah.
Going abroad,
Yeah.
not, not even in consideration scope. Where to go even?
Yeah.
It's, with so much access, it comes also at a really high cost for that generation, but equally like outrageous expectations, I feel.
Yeah.
Outrageous expectations,
Yeah.
which, and they are probably a lot more exposed to the need to stay relevant, a lot more exposed than we were and then when we are today, because we kind of churn through the stuff already, so we can work around it in a different way.
Yeah.
So, and as a result, they're becoming a lot less specialized and a lot more generalized, like just building on,
Yeah.
adding things into the toolbox. And I guess then there is no surprise that when they show up in workplace, that they're so stressed in a way about give me the next job, give me the next thing. And then to us, it looks like they're jumping from one thing to the other. To them, I'm trying to stay relevant and I'm trying to put things into my toolbox. And are we giving them still the right guidance? Are we listening to them, what they actually struggle with? And are we helping them enough in their struggle? And I can say I was not,
Yeah.
because probably I only realized that loop
Yeah.
after all these diverse conversations I had
Yeah.
at different, points. And if I connect the dots, it's not so much, I mean, there will be somebody who is just jumping around and not putting anything in the toolbox. But really, what drives that behavior and that attitude is not, I'm bored after a year and I want to do something else.
Mm.
No, I'm desperately trying to stay relevant.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a consequence to that from what you just said into the behavior, how they act in workplace then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is this sort of, I think one is, as you said, like we were discussing, the how do I stay flexible enough
Yeah.
that I can move if I need to, that if I'm redundant in one place, I can find another space where I'm not. And I think somewhere it's also creating the sense of, I think, impatience,
Mhm.
sort of,
Yeah.
because sometimes I mean, our educational model was specialization, right? So you went from high school, okay, so you chose one specialization and then you went further in, like, okay, engineering, and then you moved further in, like, with your masters, and it was like more and more and more specialized. But because of this insecurity that it's not going to be enough, they're garnering a lot of skills without really getting, perhaps, really good at one specific skill. And I think that is a problem. And see, we don't know how the pieces are going to fall with the AI evolution. We don't know yet. None of us do. We're still sort of seeing how it is playing out. But I wonder that if that insecurity might really stop them from believing in themselves. Because this is a conversation, again, I see coming up a lot, is there is this, okay, I really like this and I really want to do this. And even if it is a bit of a struggle, I really want to focus. This is what I'm good at. This is what I really enjoy doing. And then there is the voice of, but it's not enough. It's not enough. There's all this information coming at you telling you how jobs are not going to stay the same. And so that makes them quite insecure about really pursuing something that they want and something they are good at, and trusting themselves to stay the course, and then going away too far. But this is not promising enough. Maybe I need to hedge my bets. Maybe I need to do something else as well. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think every young person goes through that kind of phase. But I do think that insecurity is much higher for Gen Z. I think the anxiety is much higher for Gen Z. And what can we do to help them is, I think, $1 million question, right? It is really hard. It's really hard because, on one hand, managers, as well as institutions, schools, universities, we don't control a lot of how things are evolving. We are a lot of the time the respondents to the change, right? We are outside, we are as much as the spectators to this as they are. So it becomes really hard to tell them what to do, which is a big change from the previous generations, where we could talk to your mentors and they could handhold you into how to navigate a career. Or you could talk to your professors and they could tell you what to study, what's best to get to where you want. That certainty, that does not exist anymore, because I mean, you and I are also watching this and we can't tell them what's going to happen in 10 years and what they need to be doing. So I think that's also perhaps contributing to what you mentioned about that sort of, I think information is a great equalizer, right? So they're also like, well, why should we listen to you? Here's what, so that can also come across a lot of times as being too much of a straight talk, because they're also like, well, if you can tell us, you can help reduce the uncertainty, the insecurity, this crazy world that we're going into, and tell us what to do, we trust you. But can you? And oftentimes we're not sure we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest dynamic shift that I see, because I find myself often, what's the right advice?
Yeah.
When people ask me, how did you choose, how did you choose to move from finance to marketing? Because I liked it. So I wanted to explore it. So I did it. But how did you make the decision? Well, there was not a lot of decision to make. Do it or don't do it. Today, the set of decision making, implications is very different. And I do hesitate. Like I'm very comfortable, giving advice or providing perspective, not giving advice, but providing perspective. I find myself often hesitating because there are things I know that they're based on my experience, but there are also many things I don't know, which is okay. But I find it even hard to anticipate because the pace upon which we're moving, how the things are moving, how the, political, non-political environment is, like everything is a little bit less clear, less defined, and a lot more ambiguous, that I catch myself thinking, well, shall I actually share that perspective? I mean, it's a perspective, take it for what it is.
Yeah.
But I find myself hesitating, and the reason why I'm hesitating is because I find it hard to sometimes formulate a perspective
Yeah.
because of all the dynamics. And I think that is also very different. So you have, on the one hand, and that generation, unlike many say, they do look for guidance. Like they're not dismissive. They do look for guidance and they appreciate perspective, but they either find AI is all gonna go away and don't bother, and like very controversial perspective, which again, then they find themselves between, black and white, and then they have to color in between, which is hard.
Yes.
Now, as somebody said to me, okay, we cannot do the job for them. Like they also need to toughen up and they need to learn and they need to fail, and that's how they build resilience. True that, but at the same time, there is also a job for us to do to some extent, to at least provide some level of guidance to the extent we feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I think my always go to is, of course, I don't know which jobs are going to be taken up by AI, right? But I do know that there is still going to be a need for human connection. There's still going to be certain things that AI cannot do, right? And that's definitely going to be the case no matter what. So are you able to build at least some of those things? Or I mean, it's also, I think you talked about struggle a little bit. I was watching your last podcast and Vios talked about the importance of failing, right? One big problem with the way that everything is getting outsourced to AI is there's no failure. There's no risk of failure. A lot of times when I give an assignment to a student and it gets outsourced, there is no frustration, there's no struggle, there's no failure. And because of that, there's no joy that comes from that. There's no learning that comes out of that. And that is, I think, so important, right? Because you can take away a lot of jobs, but you cannot take away your own experience. That's a different thing. So when I see my 2-year-old playing with blocks, right? and he's just focused and he's trying to build it and he's just angry. He's not working out. He wants to give up. And then finally he creates something and then his face lights up, right? And his face lights up because it was frustrating, because it was difficult. And then something clicked. So I think one thing I would tell Gen Z is definitely don't take away your experiences of struggle and failure and discovery, because that is experiential learning, and that's not something which can be replaced. And I think in the same way we were talking about leadership and we were talking about the importance of how you lead and how you achieve things. That's again the difference. That's not something that AI can address, right? It can address the what, the goal, but not the how. So I think those are things which I try to encourage my students to think about.
Yeah. And I think the human aspect and creating connections, that's going to be, I mean, it was always relevant, but I find it funny that we hype it now so much with AI emerging. I would say, oh, yeah, you need to be, you know, if you are a good human, that's going to be your ultimate differentiator, which is true. So, I mean, I quite enjoy the progression of it because I I just ended up working with so many leaders who were not particularly great leaders, but they were extremely intelligent people. I mean, extremely smart, sharp people. And I consider myself smart, but there is there is a gap between, and I acknowledge that. Fine, like not everybody can be a genius, right? And they pride themselves, and this is how they were riding the wave of because of that. And of course, that comes at the sacrifice of some other human relationship capabilities. Now, AI can do all of that a lot faster
Yeah.
and a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you are a jerk
Yeah.
with very, good brain, but
Yeah.
there's better. Sorry.
Yeah.
So what's left of you? So I'm kind of, I have a bit of a satisfaction coming
Yeah.
out of it. Sad somehow.
You're not a competent jerk anymore. You're just a jerk.
You're just a jerk. Exactly. Exactly. So I'm like, okay, let's see. But okay, those people are old enough to retire, so they will probably not suffer from it. But I think the human competency, being able to build relationship, being able to relate to others, show compassion, I think those things will be a lot higher in demand and will be a lot more acknowledged as a leadership competency in the future than they were until today, or the way they eroded or came up and down in fluctuation, for sure. And the other thing I think is communication. That kind of goes a bit along with that you are able to articulate things in front of different audiences in a slightly different way. The reaction I hear to that often from Gen Z is like, yeah, but I am who I am. Well, that's an excuse. I'm sorry. You have to learn also to cater for your audience and nuance the message based on who you are in front. It's not an excuse just because you are who you are that you can just spit out and throw up on the table in front of whoever is in front of you. No, you cannot. So I think those two things, having them in mind and practicing them, creating space for yourself to practice them, I think is going to make them fantastic leaders if they want, because all the other things, they're very learnable, they're very teachable. This is something that you have to want and you have to practice to a large extent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to be practiced, right? And it is really through, as I was talking about, through that experience. And I think it is about prioritizing connection, relations,
Yeah.
empathy, communication, understanding how you can be relatable to somebody else and why that is important. Things that we have put on the back burner for decades.
Yes.
You said, oh, when you get there, then you'll just know how to do it. No, no, no. So those are things that I think will become a lot more important in education going forward. I think that fact of you as a person being relating to another person is going to become, so I think that is the only differentiator that will exist. Yeah.
Well, I think that was a great chat. Time is flying. Do you have any questions? Because we got some feedback and we've been told, oh, you guys always ask all the questions. Maybe your guests have also some questions. So we leave the space if there are any questions or a
Yeah.
question.
I want to ask you the same question that you asked me at the beginning, which is, do you consider yourself as a leader? And
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. The very simple answer is yes. And it comes really probably from a place where I look at leadership based on two big things: influence and impact. And maybe I should say impact first and influence after. Impact on whether I'm in business and I'm leading a team or not, whether I'm doing, things like Young Blossom 25, and I try to help building bridges and have an impact on young people's life, that they understand better the other side and vice versa. And obviously that translates also into influencing opinions, influencing outcomes, influencing success or failure of myself and others. And the one thing probably way too late into my the different roles that I have, way too late did I acknowledge enough. It's not only about the impact I have on the person sitting in front of me who reports to me or work within my organization, but the impact that I also have on their family, friends, which, sometimes we get hung up in the business, and I'm definitely very driven by business and delivering results. And I can get easily frustrated by people, not delivering. They were always delivering, but then all of a sudden they're not delivering.
yeah,
But what if they are going through divorce? What if something happened in the family? What if they had a very bad day and something else happened? Like, because we are, who we are, and we are influenced and impacted by many things. We bring them to work, whether we like it or not. We still bring them to work, and they have an impact on our performance, on our ability to deliver short or long term. And I started to be a lot more nuanced on paying attention also what is not the immediate impact I have on you,
yeah,
but what's happening behind you, within you as well, before I jump on, all kinds of things and all kinds of theories. I think that came a lot later, and it could have come a lot earlier if I probably had worked with the right coaches, mentors in a different way. But yeah, definitely like to be a leader as well, because I do like to impact and influence things in general. And I probably today put very different emphasis where I put my passion and my beliefs to work versus I did 20 years ago, which I think also makes sense. It's just the evolution of things and the experience that comes along with that. Yeah.
that's beautiful. And I just want to sort of put a pin on that, because what you mentioned so much about, that what we influence, the impact we have, it does not stop with the person in front of us, but there's a whole universe that's affected by that, right? Families, friends, so much, children. And that's very, very important to know. And that's, I think, where the responsibility is, and being able to know that you can influence that in a positive way as well as in a negative way. I think it is so important to understand. Thank you, Inga.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you. It was fantastic conversation. I took away a lot of reflections. It gave me again some things to process, as I will, and that all comes out after the episode is published, and then I start to release all of that on most of it on LinkedIn. I think a good reflection on leadership and what needs to be, rethought in a way. Did we define 10 actions that we need to take? Maybe not, but I think it's such a big topic that needs to be carried into the companies, into the coaching communities, into the mentoring communities, into the university lecture room communities as well. Thank you so much for joining, Gouri. It was really a blast having you here, hearing your perspective. Food for thought. Love it. Enriching. And I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it. So this is the moment where Virus always closes us out. So I don't actually know what to say, but I guess you can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. We do appreciate a comment. We do appreciate a like, and we do appreciate if we end up in your how is it called, usual podcasts where you have all your podcast lists that you're listening to. So thank you very much for listening, and see you soon.
Thank you, Inga.